As someone who grew up on the prequel trilogy, I didn't really get around to the sequel trilogy for quite some time. And by the time that I did get around to watching them, I had heard a lot about how iconic they were from my parents. But the character they hyped up the most was actually Hansolo, as they painted him as just being the coolest. And upon first viewing, I didn't really see it. To me, he was just a gunman in a world full of lightsabers and force users, so I just didn't see why he was the guy. But as an adult now, I see exactly why Han Solo was a fan favorite, and I think he has actually become increasingly underrated as a character as time passes. And this is partially due to the stinker of a film that was Solo: A Star Wars Story. Now, in classic Star Wars fashion, I know that even the bad and bland content has a fan base, but I was not a fan of the idea of a prequel story for the character, and certainly not a fan of its execution on the big screen. Which is why, as Star Wars grows in size as a franchise with the addition of new characters and the addition of lore to established characters, the competition to be a fan's favorite character is as high as it's ever been. As Din Djarin, Ahsoka, Darth Maul, Grogu, and countless others have been given great and engaging storylines and/or fun scenes to attempt to capture the hearts of fans. But I think that the scruffy-looking nerf herder is a character that is getting lost in the shuffle a bit. While he isn't force-sensitive or a wielder of a lightsaber, Han Solo manages to steal scenes throughout the saga just through charisma and on-screen presence. And he also has a very complete story from Episode 4 to his ultimate death in Episode 7. In his first outing, we see Han start out as a scoundrel with a lot of debt and seemingly no morals, who simply brushes off Obi-Wan's belief in the Force as he says, "Kid, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe that there's one all-powerful force controlling everything. There's no mystical energy field that controls my destiny." This established Han as a character that doesn't really believe in anything, but by the close of the film, he decides to believe in the rebellion. As he opts to come back and aid Luke in blowing up the Death Star, something that Han didn't really stand anything to gain from, in Episode 5, we see Han risk his life to save Luke from the cold winds of Hoth at the start of the film, and accept his fate of being frozen in carbonite at the end of the film, all in an effort to protect the people he's grown to care for. You see, while there may not be an all-powerful energy force controlling Han's destiny, the bond he's developed with his newfound friend certainly is. And in The Force Awakens, we see Han Solo try to reach out to his son who's turned to the dark side. And the man who once scoffed at the idea of the Force died trying to bring his son back to the light side of that very Force. It's a heartbreaking end to his character, but a perfect one, that fully completes his arc throughout the saga. As a former scoundrel who didn't believe in anything, to a man who was willing to die for the people he loved and what he had developed faith in. On top of this great character arc of growth throughout the saga, Han Solo just also has so many standout moments. When he sees Darth Vader in Episode 5, he just immediately starts shooting off of instinct, which was badass. Even though he didn't have a chance in hell of winning that encounter, he was still with the shits. When he tells Leia, "I know," instead of saying "I love you," is a great standout moment as well, as he displays the confidence that most guys probably wish they had. I could go on, but character moments like the two I just mentioned not only provide memorable moments for fans to grasp to, but also fully flesh out who Han Solo is. And then we had the flop of a film that was Solo: A Star Wars Story. Now, I've watched this film multiple times, and I have to be honest, from a storytelling perspective, I don't really know why this movie exists. This film, for the most part, just gives us answers to a bunch of questions that we didn't ask. Like, I personally don't really care how Han Solo got his trademark blaster or vest, or the last name Solo. In fact, seeing these things on screen honestly gives Han Solo less mystique as a character, as the ways he gets these things are just lame in all honesty. For someone who is so cool and has this aura of massive charisma around him, I just don't need to see an Imperial officer create a last name for him out of thin air. Why couldn't Solo just be his actual last name? The Kessel Run was also such a letdown. For something that was heralded as a big feat back in the original trilogy, either make it an extremely impressive visual display, or just don't show it at all. It really feels like that scene got slapped into the film because they felt like they had to include it. Ironically, there's a portion of the fan base that thinks Solo is the most underrated Star Wars film, which I think is simply Cope at its finest. Not that Alden had a bad portrayal of Han Solo, but there just isn't a story to tell here. No greater point that was trying to be made. I suppose you could say that the heartbreak of losing Kara was what made Han Solo so jaded by the time of Episode 4, but what does that really do for his character? Prior to this film, our first introduction to Han was him shooting Greedo under the table as he talked calm, cool, and collected. But now our first canonical glimpse at the character is him as a bit of a wide-eyed, love-stricken character, which just makes him less cool. The romance with Leia works so well because Leia, whether she'd like to admit it or not, is the chaser in a sense in Episode 5, and then that dynamic switches in Episode 6 where Han becomes more of the chaser by the end of the film. This, in addition to the witty dialogue that the two share, is what makes their dynamic so interesting, and why Han retains his charisma even when he's in more of the chaser role. But with the Kira dynamic, we don't really see any of this, which just reinforces my opinion that Han's character didn't need the prequel story and is better off without it. Even outside of a storytelling perspective, what stands out about Solo's Star Wars story? Is the action stellar? No. Is it particularly well directed? Not really. Does the score stand out from other Star Wars films? No. So I just don't really see the appeal of the film. It's not horrible by any means, but it is really a bland film, and Han Solo should be anything but a bland character. All in all, Han Solo, as is the case with many of Harrison Ford's performances, is a character who stands out and steals countless scenes, and in my mind really proves that you don't need to have the Force or wield a lightsaber in order to be cool in the Star Wars universe. Han really puts on for us normal humans, and as time goes by and more characters with fancy abilities and fancy lightsabers get added to the Star Wars canon, I hope Han Solo doesn't get lost in the shuffle, as he is one of the best characters that this great franchise has to offer, even if his prequel film wasn't very good. If you enjoyed this analysis of Han Solo and are interested in further explorations of screen stories, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe. And if you disagreed with anything I said or feel like I missed anything, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.